Nice. Yeah.
A lot of we haven't, none of us played every Star Wars game because that's impossible. A lot of the older Star Wars games, unless you have the older consoles, you probably can only play them through emulation, which, is a huge thing. And you actually want to talk about that this week, emulation in general and what it means to you.
So yeah, we're talking about emulation today on the show. And speaking of old emulation, I want to say this before we dig too down deep. You were talking, in that beautiful little segue that you gave me about how certain games are only available at this point through emulation, right? There's just no way that you're going to be able to play a lot of these old ass, rare ass games. It's like you can't even get some of these consoles running at this point. So, how do you expect to play without emulation? I mean, the biggest point that I want to make, like I said before we dive in, is the reason I'm really okay with emulation is because of the fact that really there is no, especially one of the big three, but there is no company with a proper solution to playing the breadth of the history of video games that we should have at our disposal digitally. And we talk a lot about video game history just in the industry in general. That could be a topic for another day, of course. But this is a part of it. The fact that we just don't have access to, easily half of the games that have been released since the start of video games. Easily more than that, I would say. And it just sucks. Even with emulation, there's just so much stuff that we just do not have access to, and that's really dumb and really sucky. And you hear things like, I was watching Digital Foundry's video for the Kingdom Hearts 1.5, 2.5 remasters, and it's gorgeous 4K in gameplay, and they put it up next to the PS2, and it just looks incredibly changed since then. But they're like, yeah, man, the cutscenes are, basically just the same as the PS2 versions because, they don't have the assets, the proper assets. They're like, no, wait, Jared, you were telling me that about a game. What it was with Kingdom Hearts is they had to redo a bunch of the gameplay assets to make them 4K because they didn't have them. They had to basically buy a retail copy of the game, the PS3 version, and
Parappa the Rapper
just rip
was the
those
game I was talking
assets.
about.
You were telling me about the cutscenes in
Yeah.
Parappa the Rapper. Sorry,
Yeah.
I got those two switched, but
Well, same thing. Apples to oranges.
anyways, yeah, exactly. So yeah, it sucks that these publishers are like, oh, or I mentioned Nintendo selling, they're downloading ROMs off of Emu Paradise or whatever and like selling it on the eShop. Like, what the fuck? And then yeah, these guys are at Square Enix like go out to GameStop or the equivalent in Japan and have to rip a copy, a retail copy, and get this code off so that they can up-res it to 4K. It's like, are we just not preparing? We're just not thinking about the future at all with these companies. It's really frustrating. And so, freedom throughout the universe. Emulate all you want, kids.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies see emulation as like, oh, it's a bunch of thieves that want to steal our games, and there probably is a small percentage of people who just want to play emulators because they don't want to buy old games, and that's just, they think like, those games already came out, why should I buy them again? But I think a lot of it has to do with, it's the best way to play older games because companies do such a terrible job at game preservation and like not being able to bring them and keep them around to the modern age, right? So the only way we can play a lot of these older games is through emulation. Like, I want to applaud whoever did the Disney Afternoon Collection because those were well done and they hold up and they play really well and everything like that, and they add in the modern touches of like achievements and saving and rewind mechanics, and I think it's all about game preservation.
That's the stuff we need.
Yeah, and I think emulation and like third-party emulation and these people that do these is an answer to companies being piss poor at game preservation. Like, you shouldn't be mad at these people because they're quote-unquote stealing your money. You should be mad at them because they're doing the work you should be doing and you're too lazy or you don't want to invest in the work. Like, that's what it is,
Yeah. Piss poor is a good way to put it.
Yeah, and it's they're kind of just behind. I mean, as soon as there's a device out there that is capable of running something, it's gonna happen, right? Legal or not, like even on like iPhones, that's the one friend Nintendo and Sony still has because they don't naturally let you download emulators, right? But you could, plenty of people have figured out a way to get around that, and some sort of fancy hacks to their iPhone, and then they can download anything they want, and so on. There's always a way. When a device has hardware capable of something, someone's gonna do it. So I think we'll never, like the games we have now, like back to like the NES era, the NES era, like we'll never lose because the internet is just too large and there's just too many people. Now it may not be. I know there's people out there working on like museums and actual like organized archives of games and stuff, whereas the internet is just crap all over the place, right? But I think it's always going to be available, and emulate like the technology behind it is cool as hell, no matter what. Like whether you think it's good or bad for you, like it's really cool that I literally just out of curiosity downloaded an N64 emulator for my phone, like my literal phone that's like 5 inches wide that I take in my pocket everywhere I go, and I can boot up Ocarina of Time.
And you could hook up a controller to it if you really wanted to go that far, and then you're just doing it.
It gives you little touchscreen controls, but that's not really. You could do that, but yeah, all you need is a little Bluetooth controller. Heck, I could even use the DualShock, and it would work.
You have a lot of options here.
Right, so it's really cool that's a thing, and it's only getting better, right? Like I've seen, there's a Wii U emulator. There's people playing Breath of the Wild in 1080p on their PCs. Now that's airing on the more on the illegal shady side, shady backdoor deal side.
Well, that
just came out.
A lot of that stuff is straight up piracy, but that's
right.
Talking about Breath of the Wild and then talking about like what we've kind of leaned into, which is like video game history with almost lost games, right? That's totally different. So
yeah, I mean that's true of any media, right? Like look at like books. I'm sure there's probably hundreds of thousands of books that existed and now they're gone, and no one will never know, right?
Oh yeah, and a ton of that is penny dreadful trash, but at the same time,
right,
it would be nice to have them archived or whatever.
Yeah.
I want to say we were talking about before the show, like, Jared, you were saying you're not super into emulation. I am. Obviously, I want to have this conversation for that reason. And then, Dom, you just brought it up, a great point, even though, yeah, you're straight up just pirating if you're playing Breath of the Wild on your PC right now. But at the same time, a big part of emulation that I really like is I'm playing, essentially, a lot of times a better version of the game, even if it's the company's come out and remastered it. For example, Twilight Princess or Wind Waker HD on the Wii U. And I'm not even talking about emulating either of those HD versions through a Wii U emulator. I'm talking about if you went back onto Dolphin, which is the GameCube and Wii emulator, and you emulated the actual GameCube versions of those games, up-res them to 1080p and add anti-aliasing and all this other stuff that you can do with emulation, and they're actually looking better than the Wii U HD ports. And so stuff like that, yeah, if you can play Breath of the Wild in 1080p on your PC as opposed to probably like 720 or 900 whatever on Wii U, then it's like, yeah, do that, man. And then if you want to have the full experience, like I said, you can just buy a USB version. Yeah, it'll be third party, but a USB version of your GameCube or your NES or whatever Nintendo controller, and then you're rocking, man.
And the legality of it is apparently, I had previously thought that in no case, is it legal? Granted, no one can ever know, and you can't ever be, nothing can ever happen. But apparently, and I think it was just in one state, and everywhere else is probably unprecedented, and there's no actual rule on this, but one state somewhere, I want to say Kentucky or somewhere random, I'm not sure, ruled that if you own, a copy of the game that you purchased through the publisher, then you're actually entitled to as many ROM backups as you want, which I thought was crazy. But
the fact that that's even a conversation to me is crazy. It's like, I bought the game, you've been sticking these fucking proof of purchase tickets on the back of my products since I was born and I can remember. So like, yeah, if I've bought this game, of course I should own the ROM digitally if that's what I want. If I want to rip it, especially, if I'm going to buy the technology to rip it and put it on my PC, hell yeah, that shit's mine. I'm not saying I can sell it or whatever, but I can play it on my PC and you're not going to take me to jail for it. It's like the whole, in Tennessee, this is actually a law where, if you're sharing around your Netflix passwords, that's like a super illegal thing. And of course, that's just not really enforced, and it's the same thing with emulation, where you see this stuff. It's like, come on, Nintendo's all about this shit. Of course, it's a big thing with them, and they're all up people's asses. And then, I do not think it's been proven, but it is absolutely alleged, and there's definitely evidence to the fact that Nintendo just has downloaded ROMs off the internet for free, like the rest of us would, and then puts them up on the eShop for sale. So that's absolutely ridiculous. Not because of the fact that it's a faulty ROM or anything. I'm sure those are perfectly good, original copies or whatever, ripped off of an NES cart, but that's absolutely not the way they should be doing. That's piss poor, as Jared said.
Yeah, and just to be clear, earlier you said, which is true, I don't like playing emulators. It's not because I'm against them and I'm like,
well,
no,
I was just
bring
saying
down the
I'm
emulators.
more into it than you are, I guess.
Yeah. I'm not into them for the sake of them existing. It's just not something I like. Doing personally, like doing all of the work for. I know it's not a lot of work, but for me, I have a perfectly capable PC of playing games. I own games on Steam. Rarely, if ever, do I play games on my computer just because I like the comfort of playing on a console. And I know it's dumb, and PC gaming isn't as complicated as people make it sound or anything like that, but it's just, to me, it's more comfortable to just use a controller, turn on the console, and play, as opposed to having to download the emulator. And I know it's not a lot of work, but just in the mind work behind it, you know what I mean? The gears turning, it's just like, it's... But there is a problem there of like, if I owned a Switch, Nintendo, if you had the games available for me to buy and I didn't have to go to an emulator to play them, I would buy them. You just make them available.
If you actually ripped the fucking cart yourself.
Yeah, pretty I think, did anybody else have anything else to say about emulators? I think we went round table.
One tiny little thing I was just going to add, there are, other benefits. You can do hacks and, filters and cool stuff in your games, mod them and stuff. And also you were saying, you like to stay on console. One point just to the contrary is that even having my, at this point, I think 4-year-old MacBook Pro, it's a all console for everything from basically 4 years older and back. So all games that have ever been on PC work in that fashion. And then, I've got... I could play pretty much any NES game I want, any NES game, any SNES game. N64 is super easy to emulate. GameCube's the same. Wii is super easy to emulate. Even the motion controls you can do really well in Dolphin. Obviously now you're able to do stuff like Wii U all the way up to last generation. They're figuring out. I'm sure there's like
PS3
underground stuff with PS3
like
and 360.
Done.
Yeah, exactly. There's like underground stuff there, maybe builds you could find, but they'll get to the point really soon where those are just easy to emulate, as PS2 is easy to emulate right now, or I'm not sure about original Xbox, but I'm sure you could do that if you wanted to. And then, of course, all your handhelds are super easy to emulate, your PSP, your DS, your 3DS, and all that. So it's really cool to just have that one. My laptop is like a box of just gaming history at that point.
I think the biggest issue I have with emulation is the same issue I have with Nintendo. Now I don't really own a lot of physical games. Most of my stuff is digital. I like having an account, not so much for like the achievements or the trophies, but just an account where I can see everything I've played and my lineage there, just so I have a frame of reference. Because
good luck with that.
No, I have a good memory, but it's hard to remember all these games you play and stuff like that. And like one of my biggest problems with emulation, that is a big problem with Nintendo, it's been a problem forever, is like there's not a digital account legacy kind of thing.
Just
obviously you have to buy
give
games.
Me my
over
library.
And over. Yeah, so it's hard to keep track of all that stuff. And like, I think I don't like PC gaming for the same reason I don't like emulation, and it's just that because it's like, yeah, you can make all these games better, but you have to do mods, and that's not bad. Like, it's good that you get to play these games at their best, that you can ever play them. But for me, it's not work that the outcome is worth it to me personally. But like emulators are cool.
Sure.
Like I had a PSP, and like I told you guys, that was an emulator machine for me. So
yeah, I totally get what you're saying, because obviously I think I play PC the least out of us three, but it is cool having that option. Like you said, you can play the game like at its ultimate settings, and then really beyond what even the developer was able to do with patches and stuff. So that's cool.